Okay, hello and welcome, dear viewers. So welcome to the Westminster Development Policy Network virtual seminar. We're very delighted to have two prominent speakers today. The first speaker is Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Professor Jeffrey Sachs is a world-renowned economist, best-selling author, global leader in sustainable development. He's widely recognized for his bold and effective strategy to address complex challenges around the world. He advised many government high-level officials, also the UN Secretary General. Professor Sachs spent many years as a professor at Harvard. Currently, he's at Columbia University. He is native of Detroit, Michigan. He received all of his degrees, BA, MA, and PhD at Harvard University. And we're very excited and delighted to have him last year visit our university at Westminster. And we're keen to continue this relationship with Professor Sachs. Professor Sachs also is the chair of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, which hosts basically lots of universities as members. And its main mission is to mobilize scientific and technical expertise in support of sustainable development goals around the world. So thank you, Professor Sachs. And to provide his comments and to discuss today, we have another prominent speaker in Uzbekistan, Professor Komjan Karimov. He's currently the rector of the University of World Economy and Diplomacy under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Uzbekistan. And formerly, he was our rector at Westminster International University in Tashkent. So both of you, thank you. And without losing more time, I'll give the floor to you, Professor Sachs. So.
Thank you so much, Bakram, and what a pleasure to be back with you at Westminster International University. Though we had planned that it would be in person, we're doing everything these days, of course, virtually until we get the COVID-19 pandemic under control. But we'll be back in Tashkent, my wife and I hope very soon. We really so much treasured the visit to your country and also the most amazing sights and history. So we're excited to be back. We're discussing the world at such a disrupted time, obviously. We haven't had a pandemic like this for at least 100 years. And the COVID-19 pandemic has really shaken up the whole world society, economic turmoil around the world, political change. So I'll just make a few quick remarks and then have a discussion with Professor Karimov about that. I think in general in the world, if we look at the big trends in the world, not the immediate crisis, there are three major trends that I would emphasize. One is environmental crises in general. And certainly Uzbekistan is familiar with long-term climate change, water crisis, and so on. And I would say that this epidemic is part of that environmental disruption because we're having new emerging diseases like COVID-19 coming from disrupted nature, with diseases passing from animals, in this case, horseshoe bats in China, to the human population with higher frequency. But we're also having droughts with more frequency. We're also having dust storms with more frequency. We're also having heat waves with more frequency. We're losing biodiversity. We're losing, of course, the RLC tragedy and other ecosystem changes. So first mega trend is the growing environmental crises that we need to address at the center of our global policies. The second major challenge is technological change. The pace of technological change is unprecedented. This could be good for us. And in fact, I'm very optimistic about what the digital world could mean. And for by the way, a double landlocked country like Uzbekistan, the digital world is a friend because digital doesn't care about landlocked or not. It's totally global. And so Uzbekistan can be a leader in digital-based technologies that export anywhere in the world without mattering landlocked, not landlocked, distance, and so on. So I think the digital revolution is very deep and on the whole promising, but how to mobilize it effectively. And now that we're in the COVID crisis, how to use digital for education, for government services, for telemedicine, for e-commerce, for new global job creation so that a skilled computer programmer in Tashkent could work for any company anywhere in the world, doesn't have to be next door, because we can work online in a more effective way. So I think it will change how our businesses are organized, even how our universities work, because they are also becoming more and more online entities for teaching, not only in the classroom. So that's the second big disruption. And the third big disruption, very much relevant for Central Asia, is the geopolitical change that continues underway. We've been in a period where it was said that the US was the leader of the world economy, but the role of the US has been diminishing over time, and the role of China, of course, has been rising over time. And more generally, the role of East Asia has been increasing compared to Europe and the United States. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic accelerates that change. The only major economy in the whole world that will have positive growth this year is China, because China was the most effective country in suppressing the epidemic itself. Even though it started in China, China got it under control first. And now the economy has rebounded. China's producing a lot of goods that the rest of the world needs. And so it's having an economic rebound, whereas my country, the United States, is still in economic turmoil because our leadership is so bad. Our government is so mixed up and unable to be rational that we don't have the recovery coming. So what COVID has done is to accelerate the shift to Asia, which has been underway. And of course, Uzbekistan needs to note this because Uzbekistan is precisely on the path and has been throughout history on the path between Europe and East Asia. From the famed Silk Roads that built Bukhara and Samarkand and all of the great cultural and historic achievements of your country, till today, that role of being between, on one side connected to Asia, one side or East Asia, one side connected to Europe, is a central role and an exciting one. Now, I think that the rise of China, therefore, is extremely important and extremely positive for the world. And what I hope comes out of this crisis is stronger cooperation that includes the European Union, the countries of Central Asia, the countries of East Asia, Russia. In other words, regional cooperation to build new infrastructure and to protect the environment by shifting to renewable energy more effectively and to clean technology more effectively. So these three big challenges, environmental upheaval, technological upheaval, and geopolitical change, should be seen as one mix of how to make a better 21st century. And the answer, in my view, is we use the new digital technologies in a cooperative way to shift quickly to clean, low pollution, environmentally sustainable production technologies, clean energy. wind and solar power, electric vehicles, fast rail, that we do this cooperatively, in which East Asia, Central Asia, Western Europe are working together, not at odds with each other, but building a sustainable Eurasia that can be good for all of Eurasia, which after all is home to 70% of humanity. And this, I think, is what we should be aiming for as the lesson of COVID-19. We're vulnerable. Our only approach is to use science and technology, but to use it together cooperatively. And if we can take that lesson from this crisis, I think we actually can build in a stronger way going forward. So just a few opening thoughts, and I look forward to the discussion with Professor Karimov now.
Okay, thank you, Professor Sachs. So before I give the floor to Komcan Karimov, I would like to remind our viewers, if you have questions while the discussion, please write those using either Q&A or chat function, and I will read those as they come after the discussion with Professor Karimov. Komcan, please.
Yes, good morning once again, Professor Sachs and all the participants of this virtual webinar. And it is, of course, a pleasure and honor to speak after such a person like Professor Sachs, and very difficult to add anything to what he has said. But I think, Professor Sachs, you have you have outlined the major mega trends which affects the global societies today. But I would agree with most of those, of course, but just to add to what you have said, and I would refer actually to a recent report which was published by Deutsche Bank. It's a very strong analysis of what is happening around the world, and they actually claiming, those who wrote the report, they claiming that the era of globalization, which was dominant, for the last 40 years on the world arena, is coming to an end, and it is to be replaced by the era of disorder, how they call it, right? So, and the disorder is not just in a very pessimistic or negative way. Of course, they also saying it may bring, the new opportunities to the global society, to the world. But what they claiming, actually, of course, they have highlighted those mega trends which you have just mentioned, like environmental, the disruption, technological, digital disruption, and the strong geopolitical influences. So those mega trends they have also touched very in detail, right? But what they have also saying that why disorder? Because what we see now is that there is a strong disconnect between generations, actually. And what they're claiming is that those millennials, those who were born in late 90s of the last century, they coming to the scene, so they have a strong voices now, both economically, politically, socially. So they also trying to influence what is happening around the world. But it is still predominantly ruled by the older generation, and it is very difficult actually for them to find a common ground, because differences are so strong, and those millennials, they actually claiming that they have actually inherited all these problems because, they have very poor management and governance by all the generations, including environmental disasters, which you have just mentioned, So this obviously brings to the scene this strong divide between generations, and that actually something which brings to the scene this the age of disorder, as they claim. But I would agree in many instances, because it is true, and what we see now in the world, especially in the political the scene, all what is happening in Europe, what is happening in US, and many countries around the world, it is actually because probably the intergeneration of disconnect. So I don't think we need to diminish or rule out, that the factor from the scene. And I'm afraid it will be also more strongly impact what is happening. And what COVID-19 has accelerated, actually, the economic turmoil, as a result, social and political unrest in the parts of the world. I'm afraid this will be even stronger impacted by this the intergenerational the divide, I would suggest. So, but obviously this will have a longer term impact probably on global affairs. And as I was reading, between the lines, what you have been saying, Dr. Sachs, and I would also argue that, yeah, the old world order probably also is coming to, if not to end, but it is in transformation, I would suggest, and this, the power houses as they used to be, I'm sure they will be also changing a little bit, shifting towards Asia, as you have said, which is obvious, and we see the growing, the influence of the Asian superpowers like China, India, and others, so I'm sure this trend will only become stronger in the coming years. And obviously, for Central Asia, it has a impact because it lies between, all these superpowers, and it's in many instances, of course, Central Asia can have a benefit from this because it is between these powers. So it may broker in certain instances. It may use the advantage of being, between those the superpowers, and I'm sure economically, technologically as well, Central Asia may, if positioned properly, may benefit from this the situation, of course. So those are
very interesting remarks. Let me say a word about the generational issue in the United States, because I think it's a very, very pertinent point. In the US, there are rather strong differences of views across the generations. But in a way that I am very optimistic about, Trump, who I don't like, I think he's been a very bad president for the United States, has most of his support among older people. And probably the reason he'll lose next month, if he does, is because a lot of those older people are also moving away from him. But the older people don't understand climate change issue because they didn't grow up with it. They didn't learn about it in school. They're more conservative. They, in general, are, in my country, they're less tolerant, less international, more culturally and socially conservative. Whereas the young generation is very much attuned to the issues of the environment, for example, because they've grown up in the middle of all these crises. And in general, much more aware of cultural diversity, ethnic, religious diversity, and more open to the world than the older generation. And the older generation in the US says, okay, we run the world. That's all there is to it, because they grew up after World War II and the Cold War. So in the US, at least, the generational change will be a good thing from the point of view of renovating ideas to be more realistic with the kind of world that we have. More tolerance, more environmental, I would say more positive when it comes to the role of government, as opposed to saying just leave it to the marketplace, which doesn't make too much sense for the kind of problems that we have. And so I'm looking forward to that generational change. I can't speak about that for other countries. I don't know what it would be like in Uzbekistan, the different point of view of young people versus older people. But in the US, it's actually a positive development. Trump's an old man with old ideas. Biden's also an old man, but at least with better ideas. But the young people, I think, have the best ideas in the US and the more realistic ones. One of the problems also that I think is quite fundamental is in the minds of older Americans, they see China mainly as a threat, not as a cooperative partner. And this is the Cold War mentality, that everything is us versus someone else. And what we do need to avoid an era just of disorder is a cooperative approach. And so the real question is, can we promote that kind of cooperation actively? And can we find a culture of cooperation? So Europe, I think, now operates in a relatively coherent way. And I'm hoping that Europe could make an outreach to Central Asia, to Southeast Asia, to China, so that the Eurasian challenges could be handled in a cooperative manner, because then we'll make much, much faster advances. So I'm going to read the Deutsche Bank article. I haven't read it. I think our mission should not be to live with an era of disorder. I think we should try to overcome it. So the question is, how could we use active diplomacy and the leadership of the universities and the thinking institutions to promote an orderly approach to problem solving?
Absolutely, absolutely, Dr. Sachs. I would totally agree with your point, and especially the magnitude of the problems and sorts of the global problems we have right now. The things you have just mentioned. Just take environmental, the disruption alone. So those challenges, it's impossible. Whatever power you have, whatever wealth you have, it is impossible for one country or even for a block of countries to overcome, because it's global issues and which need a global solution. But what we see right now is growing polarization between the countries, and so on. So it is really, I completely agree with you. Of course, the hope is for international organizations, the global ones such as UN, for instance, to step in and to play probably more active role. But we also see certain countries trying to undermine the global organizations such as UN.
Yeah.
But I probably the institutions such as universities, research communities, they should probably have a stronger voice, and we need more advocates like yourself, for sustainable development, and for countries to work together in partnership. Otherwise, I completely agree with you. Those problems we have, impossible to resolve, by individual efforts. So that's my remark. Thanks a lot, Jeff.
I'm seeing in the chat that one of the questions that was asked to me by Temur Makamov is about how Uzbekistan could develop its capital markets and attract investment like other countries have. And there is a very basic point that I would say about this, which is that for any country, part of the challenge is institutional challenge to make the stock market or the foreign direct investment regime work institutionally. But the second part is a geographic challenge. Because Temur asked, well, how do you compare, say, what Uzbekistan's doing with Poland or with the UAE and so on? And my experience is that every country is so much influenced by its geography. Poland, when it made its economic recovery, based it on its being a neighbor of Germany. So it was German investment that came across the border, and Poland became a major supplier to the German automotive and manufacturing sector, for example, and that created a lot of jobs. The UAE, the United Arab Emirates, has taken a different geographic role as being a hub, something like Singapore, for international trade and commerce. Now, the question is then for Uzbekistan, what is the role of Uzbekistan? Well, Uzbekistan was at the center of many kingdoms when the Silk Roads were the dominant trade route. Then Uzbekistan, Bukhara, Samarkand were the very center of the world, you could say, because everything went through them from Asia to Europe, Europe to Asia, and it was a centerpiece of a global society and global trade. I think that in the 21st century, the challenge is to make sure that Central Asia is playing that kind of role at the center of the world's most populous land map. So Uzbekistan can be a center for tourism, for trade, for finance, for commerce, but only if there's global cooperation, not in a splintered world, but if there's active Eurasian-wide integrated economy. And so the best friend of Uzbekistan's development is a cooperative environment that then builds infrastructure, fast rail, fiber, good 5G connectivity, all renewable energy grid, because Uzbekistan, while it now produces fossil fuels, gas especially, it should be a powerhouse in wind and solar power also. And it should be exporting that to other parts of Eurasia, which would exist if there were a large-scale grid like the Chinese want to build, actually, an interconnected energy system. So I think the idea of Uzbekistan as a kind of central hub for lots of Eurasian economic activity makes sense to me. And that would develop interest in many different sectors. Of course, to have this happen, Uzbekistan needs also to develop its digital capacities, know-how, because digital will be at the core of everything, of transport, of banking, finance, telecommunications of every kind, payment systems. And so I think that that will also be extremely important. So I would think geographically, especially Uzbekistan has a unique geography, so it's especially important to think geographically in the economic development strategy.
Okay, thank you, Professor Sachs. Before I start reading questions, I have one question, and I promised Sonia to finish reading your recent book, which I'm guilty of not finishing fully. So
I hope you've enjoyed so far what you've read.
Yes. So you wrote a book called "The Ages of Globalization: Geography, Technology, and Institutions," and I quite like the history part. So I'm sure it took you a long time to go through this. But I'm quite keen on the horse part, because I always say a horse is the steam engine, which was, this region is a great friend of horses, basically.
Yeah.
and it played quite a remarkable role in the empires. You say land-based empires. So I couldn't get to the final part, which I will ask now. The first question is, why did you write this book? And the second question is, from this book, what could you recommend for Central Asia, just to make sense of the world, and going forward geopolitically, what would be the priorities?
So I wrote the book because of the way that I learned economics at the beginning, and then in the course of time. When I first studied economics, my courses were basically about economic institutions. So about how foreign exchange market works, how the capital markets work, how a market economy functions, and so on. And you don't learn, I didn't learn as a student anything about particular countries or geography or anything else. And I learned about institutions. And then as I started working in economics as a practicing policy advisor almost 40 years ago, geography suddenly was so important in a way that I had never studied and nobody taught me. For example, my first work as a practicing economist was in Bolivia in South America. Bolivia is a landlocked country. And so much of Bolivia's history revolves around the fact that it is landlocked and how that has shaped its economics and its politics. Well, nobody had ever told me about that. So I started reflecting on the economics, on the geography. And then I worked in Poland. And as I mentioned, Poland's geography was very distinctive because of its being just next door to the main economy of Western Europe. And that gave a strategy for rapid catching up after 1989. But then more and more, of course, like all of us, it was clear that the technological changes, especially the computer age, the automation age, and then the internet and digital connectivity was changing everything. And so here were three big concepts: institutions, geography, and technology. And when you study a lot of economics, generally an author likes one of those and neglects the others. I found that very unsatisfactory over the years. The idea that you need a holistic approach became very central to my way of thinking. And I'd have strange arguments where people said, no, it's all institutions. Geography doesn't matter. And I say, are you kidding? Look at how geography affects any individual country. No, it's all institutions. And then some people would say, no, it's all technology. And then others would say, well, where did that technology come from? Or why do some countries deploy it and not others? And so on. So I wrote this book because I want to help people to think in the interconnection of these three fundamental pillars that shape our society. And any one of them alone only gives a very limited picture of how an economy works. And so if, Uzbekistan policymakers say, all we have to do in our capital markets is follow the best practice that the World Bank says or something, this will be wrong because it will not take into account the technological developments, the need for fintech, for example, for new financial technology, or it won't take into account the special geographic department and potential for Uzbekistan. So learning to think about these three different interconnected ways, I think, is extremely important. And then when you come to a challenge like, okay, Central Asia, what does it mean? Well, the first thing is it means it's central. So you have to think about the geography of being central. Central to what? Central to Eurasia. And of course, being central to Eurasia has geopolitical ramifications. Uzbekistan needs good relations with Russia, with Europe, with China, with everybody. It can't go just one way. It has to, and then it has to help make a friendly environment so that it's not trapped between one hostile side and one friendly side. And so the main role of Central Asia should be for all of the powers around it, be nice to each other, cooperate. We don't want the Russian Empire back. We don't want to have Chinese dominance. We don't want to have Europe determining everything. We want to have cooperation. And this actually is the Central Asian most important need and message is cooperation all around, not hostility. And then you can build all the infrastructure connecting all these different components. Then the second point, obviously, is for Central Asia, to my mind, the internet and digital changes a lot. It changes how energy systems, transport systems, payment systems, capital markets, jobs work. It used to be certain jobs couldn't be done in Central Asia. Somebody would have to leave and go someplace else, but you can now work anywhere. We're all working from home. Home can be in Tashkent, New York City, Rio, who knows? It doesn't even matter. The electrons move so fast, we can work for any company anywhere. So it's a different kind of, because of technology, there are new possibilities that are extremely important. Then the institutions need to be shaped to be appropriate because we know that the institutions of central planning were so limited, but we also know the institutions of purely free market make no sense also. So we need to design the institutions in a sophisticated way that takes into account the changing reality of our time. And the old debates of 100 years ago, market versus state, need to be updated to the 21st century. Obviously, it's both. I think, by the way, a lot of what China is accomplishing is a creative mix of state and market that really shows some strengths. Not everything is done right, in my view, but many things are done right. And so we need to update our institutional ideas in light of technology. So I think for Central Asia, that mix of geography, institutions, and technology is a good framework for asking what should Uzbekistan's economic strategy be? What should our economy look like in 20 years or 30 years? And also to understand, by the way, right now Uzbekistan produces a lot of natural gas, but the world is moving to zero carbon energy. What does that mean strategically for a hydrocarbon producer? That's a big question. That is a big strategic question for the region. Also, Uzbekistan has lots of sunshine, so you could be a great solar power country, not just for the domestic energy use, but actually for exporting electrons to China, for example, or to other regions. And that's something that the engineers could help to design. So this is why I wrote the book, to try to get a more holistic approach to the way we think about shaping economic life.
Okay, thank you. I am enjoying reading this book, and I recommend to all participants to get a copy. If you were here, I would get it signed by you, but
we'll do that as soon as I come.
So I'm cognizant of your time. So how many questions can I ask, Professor?
Maybe a couple more. We'll go on for, say...
one question from Suna Park. What role do you think local culture, traditions, and heritage play in sustainable development? So Uzbekistan has a number of historical and cultural predispositions that can potentially act as drivers of sustainable development. So what's the role of culture? Also the role of civil society to drive sustainability, if you have any comments. Then I'll ask my second question.
Yeah, I think we need, all of us, we need two cultures. One culture is our home culture, our culture of our mother language, our culture of our local history, religion, and so on. And the second culture we need is the culture of global citizen, because we're so interconnected. There's no denying that we live in an interconnected world where we deal with people across all races, religions, countries, and we need to be able to do that in a civilized way and in a cooperative way. So I think all of us need two parts of our personality and our cultural development. One is pride in our homegrown cultures. These are our traditions. They give us our roots. They give us our respect for our ancestors. They help us to locate ourselves in important meaning of life. But it can't close the door to say, oh, but we're the only culture. And we have to absolutely, I believe, give up on the idea that one culture is going to dominate other cultures, because this is where most of the wars come from, or the misunderstandings, or the arrogance comes from. So we need a culture that is also a global citizenship culture. And I think our children need to be educated in that way also, and have the experience. You know, a child in a school in Tashkent, even a 10-year-old, could be on a Zoom conference with the children in other parts of the world, in China, in the United States. This would be good for them to meet each other, to make presentations about their cultures to each other, and give them the idea that, oh, we're part of a whole world community, and we get to know each other. So I think that this is the difficulty. Cultures tend to be very arrogant sometimes, you know, thinking we're the center of the world, everyone else is a barbarian. This is how many cultures have thought. And we can't survive if we believe that, but we shouldn't give up our culture either, because that's what we love most. The food we eat, what our mothers told us, what our own home religion, and so on, but have that in a global context. This, I think, is what we need in the 21st century.
Okay, thank you. And one more. So as an economist, I have to ask probably a question from a student. So how did you reach such heights in the field of economics? What should an economist be like? What skills should he or she have? And how to become a successful economist in this century, I guess, going forward? Because you say the idea of markets and states and institutions are changing, but textbooks are not changing quite rapidly as electrons, as you say. So your comments on this?
For me, I think my main approach has been that I really got interested in economics when I started this, to ask the question, what should we do? As they said in traditionally, but what should we do to make economic life better? And when I was in high school, I had a pen pal, not by email, but by writing letters out, who lived in Berlin, in German Democratic Republic, in the Soviet side of Germany. And we exchanged emails, and then I went to Berlin to meet him. And I got very interested in differences of places around the world. So I studied, that was 48 years ago, I became interested in the question, what is the best approach? And what should countries do, or governments do, or people do to improve the economy? But the answer to, and I basically pursued that question for almost 50 years now. And I still like that question because I think the world is so interesting, and it's our job to help improve it. But what I learned is two big things. One, be involved in actual problem solving. So don't just do it in a book, but get involved in government policy or in even in your community or city to work on specific problems, because that trains your mind. Like becoming a good doctor, you actually work with the patient, not just in a textbook. And the second is keep learning. And much of what you need to be a good economist is not only what you read in economics books, it's again what you read in history books or geography books or technology books or other fields. And so keep reading, keep learning, and work on problems that interest you, practical problem solving, because you'll learn a lot by connecting the theory with the practice. And I found that to be a very productive way to pursue the work in this field.
Dr. Sachs, thank you very much. It's been an honor and privilege to host you today and to moderate the session. And I would like to thank our discussant, Professor Karimov, as well. It's an honor and privilege to host both of you. And again, we can continue this discussion forever, but I understand you have other commitments, and it's already 7 p.m. here in Tashkent. And I hope with your support, next time we meet, we can together do our best to achieve the SDGs by 2030 in Uzbekistan. So
let me thank you, and just to close by saying, first, it's a privilege for me to be with everybody. Second, I hope that I could help in any way for Westminster International University to continue to have a leadership role on the SDGs in Uzbekistan and in Central Asia, and through the UN network globally, because what you would bring to the whole global problem solving would be very, very important. So I hope that we can really continue to work on this. I did have one other plan that I still want to help implement, so I'm going to give the idea to you. Okay. But you know, Ulugh Bek's madrasa celebrated how many? It's 600 years.
Yes.
This year.
Yes.
And we can't travel this year, but I do think we should have a global meeting at the madrasa of intellectuals from around the world to celebrate this anniversary, maybe next year or the year after, because it's a historic event, because it's a most beautiful place, and because Ulugh Bek was one of the greatest scientists of his age, and he helped to make the astronomical revolution of Europe through his observations. And that shows the universality of science also. So I want to just plant the idea, because I would be very happy to be part of it, if we could somehow have a global celebration when we can all travel again to this 600th anniversary.
Yes, this is well noted, and I think there are some discussions and works already in play, but because of the pandemic, the in-person or off-face celebration probably will happen next year. But I agree, in this region, we're standing on the shoulders of giants as we speak, and we should continue this tradition. And I thank you very much for your support and for the role of the universities, especially to play in achieving sustainable development and promoting the idea of sustainable development. So I thank you very much again, and I apologize to our viewers for not being able to read all of your questions, but I will send it, I promise to send it to Professor Sachs. So.
Excellent. Thank you so much, everybody.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Karimov. Great to see you.
Thanks a lot.
Good. Thanks a lot.